They thought I'd quietly pack my laptop and disappear. But when they slashed my pension right in the middle of their fake farewell party, they triggered a bomb I'd buried when I was 26. 35 pages of contracts, one forgotten clause, $40 million. And me, the employee they never bothered to truly see. You won't believe how I dismantled their entire machine. My name is Miranda Clark, and I'm about to tell you the most expensive lesson in corporate betrayal ever recorded. Chapter 1. The Blind Side. The champagne was cheap, the cake was stale, and the smiles were faker than a $3 bill. I should have seen it coming when they organized a transition celebration for my move to the special consulting division, corporate speak for the place where careers go to die. I was 42, had given Ellison Cortec the best 15 years of my professional life, and apparently, that counted for nothing. The email came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Buried between spam about office coffee upgrades and reminders about parking violations. Subject line: Pension plan restructuring. Immediate action required. My hands went cold as I read the corporate jargon that essentially said, "We're canceling your retirement benefits. Effective immediately. Have a nice life." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sitting in the same conference room where, 15 years ago, I'd signed away my startup Sparrow Link Systems to Ellison Cortec. Back then, I was the golden girl, the visionary who'd built supply chain management software from scratch in my garage. They'd courted me for months, promising partnership, respect, and a retirement package that would let me buy a vineyard in Napa. Now, Adam Vickers, the same intern I'd trained to use pivot tables, was avoiding eye contact while HR drones explained my exciting new opportunities in consulting. The kid who used to bring me coffee was now Senior Vice President of Operations, and he couldn't even look me in the eye. "Miranda," chirped Jessica from HR, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We know this transition might feel sudden, but the consulting role offers so much flexibility. You'll love working from home." Translation: You're fired, but we're too cowardly to say it outright. I nodded, smiled, and played the part of the gracious veteran stepping aside for the new generation. Inside, I was calculating. Always calculating. It's what made me good at building supply chains, and it's what would make me excellent at destroying them. The farewell party was a masterclass in corporate theater. Colleagues who'd ignored me for years suddenly materialized with heartfelt speeches about my invaluable contributions. The same people who'd stolen my ideas in meetings were now toasting my innovative spirit. Adam finally approached me, champagne flute trembling in his hand. "Miranda, I want you to know this wasn't personal," he mumbled, still unable to maintain eye contact. "The board made this decision. Market conditions, restructuring costs." I sipped my champagne, Dom Pérignon. I noted, not the usual conference room swill, and smiled. "Of course, Adam. Business is business." He looked relieved, probably thinking I'd taken the news better than expected. Poor kid had no idea I'd already started planning his professional funeral. As the party wound down and people drifted back to their cubicles, I lingered in the break room, ostensibly cleaning up but actually observing. The new hires were already eyeing my corner office. The accounts I'd managed for a decade were being redistributed among junior staff. My life's work was being parceled out like items at a garage sale. I drove home in my sensible Toyota Camry, the same car I'd bought when I joined Ellison Cortec, believing I'd be there until retirement. The irony was suffocating. I'd turned down offers from Google, Microsoft, and Amazon to stay loyal to a company that had just loyalty-checked me into unemployment. My apartment in Arlington Heights was a shrine to my corporate dedication. Ellison Cortec awards lined the walls. Photos from company retreats gathered dust on shelves. Even my coffee mug bore the company logo, a geometric pattern that now looked like a target. I poured myself a glass of wine, a 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon I'd been saving for a special occasion. Getting fired seemed special enough. Then I remembered the garage. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Arsenal. My garage was a graveyard of ambition. Boxes of documents from the Sparrow Link acquisition sat stacked against the walls. covered in dust and spider webs. I'd kept everything, every email, every draft, every revision of the merger agreement. Call it paranoia or prescience. But I'd never thrown away a single piece of paper from that deal. The wine was making me nostalgic, or maybe just reckless. I started pulling boxes, sneezing as dust clouds erupted with each movement. Tax returns, patent applications, correspondence with lawyers, the paper trail of a dream that had been sold and forgotten. Then I found it. Box 7, labeled Merger Final Docs, in my own handwriting. Inside, beneath layers of carbon copies and duplicate forms, was the original merger agreement, not the sanitized version in the company files, but the working draft with handwritten notes in the margins and my distinctive blue ink signature. I'd been drinking when I negotiated this contract. Not drunk, but loose enough to be creative. I remembered the late nights in the lawyer's office, pushing for protections that seemed paranoid at the time. The legal team had been exhausted, eager to close the deal and move on to bigger clients. They'd agreed to clauses they probably forgot about before the ink was dry. Page 28. Addendum C. Subsection 14.7c. My wine glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the concrete floor. Red wine spread across the gray surface like blood. The clause was beautiful in its simplicity. If the founding members' benefits were terminated without cause or due process, and if the acquired intellectual property remained integral to the parent company's operations, then the founding member retained the right to exercise certain proprietary claims. Translation: if they fired me and were still using my software, I could shut them down. The penalty clause was even more beautiful. $40 million or immediate cessation of all licensed technology access. I'd buried this landmine 15 years ago, and they'd just stepped on it. I spent the next 3 hours spread across my living room floor. Wine-stained pages scattered around me like tarot cards predicting the future. The more I read, the more I realized how thoroughly I'd protected myself. Young Miranda had been paranoid, but she'd also been brilliant. Ellison Cortec wasn't just using my software, they were built on it. Every client interaction, every logistics calculation, every supply chain optimization ran through code I'd written in my garage. They'd upgraded the interface, added features, and slapped their branding on it. But the core architecture was mine. And now they'd voided our agreement. I looked at the framed photo on my mantle, me shaking hands with James Ellison himself on the day we signed the merger. Both of us smiling, both of us thinking we'd gotten the better deal. He'd gotten a company, I'd gotten a time bomb. The clock on my wall read 2:17 a.m. I had 36 hours before my employment officially ended. 36 hours to decide whether to slink away quietly or burn down everything they'd built on my foundation. I opened my laptop and started typing. Chapter 3, The Architecture of Revenge by Dawn. I had a plan. Not just a plan. A blueprint for corporate destruction so elegant it would make Sun Tzu weep with envy. First, I needed to understand the current structure. Ellison Cortec had grown from a mid-sized logistics company into a Fortune 500 corporation, largely on the strength of the supply chain management system I'd sold them. They'd never bothered to rebuild the core infrastructure, just kept adding layers of new code like cosmetic surgery on a corpse. I spent the morning at the local library, using their computers to research Ellison Cortec's current client base. The beauty of public records is that corporations love to brag about their successes. Annual reports, SEC filings, and press releases painted a picture of a company that had never weaned itself off my intellectual property. Their biggest clients: Walmart, Amazon, Target, Home Depot. Their proudest achievement: a supply chain optimization system that reduced logistics costs by 23% industry-wide. Their biggest vulnerability: me. I drove to the office supply store and bought a burner phone, 3 prepaid credit cards, and a stack of legal pads. If I was going to war, I needed to be untraceable. The next step was establishing my arsenal. I registered 3 shell companies online: Willowbrook Holdings, Northbridge Systems, and Copper Pine Investments. Each one was a paper entity with a P.O. box address and a phone number that forwarded to my burner. Perfectly legal, completely anonymous. While the incorporation paperwork processed, I dove deeper into Ellison Cortec's vulnerabilities. The company had gone public 5 years ago, which meant their financial records were open books. I studied their quarterly reports like a general studying enemy troop movements. Their weakness was obvious. They were over-leveraged and under-diversified. 90% of their revenue came from supply chain management services. If that system went down, they'd lose everything. I spent the afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, nursing a latte and setting up encrypted email accounts for my shell companies. The barista probably thought I was just another remote worker, not someone planning the most expensive breach of contract in corporate history. My phone buzzed with a text from Adam. "How are you holding up? The office feels weird without you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The time for sympathy was over. That evening, I made my first move. Using the Willowbrook Holdings email account, I sent an inquiry to 3 of Ellison Cortec's major clients, expressing interest in their supply chain optimization services. The responses came back within hours, glowing recommendations for the revolutionary system that was transforming their operations. Revolutionary. They were calling my 15-year-old code revolutionary. I opened a bottle of wine, a better vintage this time, and toasted my younger self. She'd been smarter than anyone gave her credit for. Chapter 4. The Paper Trail. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called in sick. Jessica from HR sounded genuinely concerned, probably thinking I was having a breakdown over the pension situation. If only she knew how constructive my breakdown was going to be. I spent the day in the basement of the county courthouse, digging through property records, business licenses, and incorporation documents. The beauty of the American legal system is that everything is documented somewhere, and most of it is public record. What I found was even better than I'd hoped. Ellison Cortec had been sloppy in their expansion. They'd acquired 17 smaller companies over the past decade, each one folded into the parent corporation with minimal legal oversight. More importantly, they'd never bothered to consolidate their technology licenses. Each acquisition had brought its own software, its own contracts, and its own legal obligations. The result was a Frankenstein's monster of a company held together by a web of overlapping agreements, most of which referenced my original SparrowLink technology as the core integration platform. I photographed every relevant document with my phone, building a digital library of corporate negligence. By closing time, I had enough evidence to prove that Ellison Cortec wasn't just using my software. They were legally required to use it under multiple merger agreements. The drive home was surreal. I was listening to NPR, some story about corporate whistleblowers. When it hit me, I wasn't a whistleblower. I was something much more dangerous. I was a woman with a legitimate grievance and the legal firepower to do something about it. I stopped at a FedEx office and overnighted copies of all my documents to 3 different safety deposit boxes in 3 different states. Paranoid, maybe. But I'd learned that paranoia was just preparation for the inevitable betrayal. My apartment had transformed into a war room. I'd cleared the dining table and covered it with printouts, legal documents, and handwritten notes. Red string connected various points on a corkboard like a detective investigating a serial killer. In a way, I was hunting down a corporate serial killer that had been murdering careers for decades. The centerpiece of my strategy was simple. I would use their own contracts against them. Every merger, every acquisition, every licensing agreement they'd signed referenced my technology. If they wanted to keep using it, they'd have to honor the original terms. If they'd already violated those terms by canceling my pension, they'd have to pay the penalty. $40 million. The number had seemed absurd when I'd negotiated it 15 years ago, just a legal fantasy to make me feel better about selling my company. Now it looked like prophecy. I poured myself a glass of wine and started drafting my first letter. Chapter 5. The Opening Gambit. The letter was a masterpiece of legal precision wrapped in corporate courtesy. I spent 3 days crafting it, researching every case law reference, double-checking every contractual citation. When I finally printed it on expensive letterhead I'd had made for Northbridge Systems, it looked like something that had emerged from a white shoe law firm. The recipient was James Ellison himself, CEO and founder of Ellison Cortec. I'd met him exactly once, at the merger signing 15 years ago. He'd been charming then, full of promises about partnership and mutual respect. I wondered if he'd remember me now. The letter was simple in its devastation. Dear Mr. Ellison, I am writing to inform you of a material breach of the Sparrowlink Systems acquisition agreement dated March 15, 2010. Specifically, the termination of founding member benefits without cause or due process. As outlined in Addendum C, subsection 14.7c of the original merger agreement. As per the terms of said agreement, Ellison Cortec has 30 days from receipt of this notice to cure the breach or face immediate cessation of all licensed technology access and associated penalties as outlined in the penalty clause. The remedy amount, as calculated per the original agreement's inflation adjustment formula, is $40,000. Please direct all correspondence regarding this matter to the address below. Sincerely, Miranda Clark, founder, Sparrowlink Systems, legal representative, Northbridge Systems. I hand-delivered it to Ellison Cortec's corporate headquarters on a Tuesday morning, walking past the receptionist who'd greeted me cheerfully for 15 years and handing the envelope to the mail clerk like it was a routine business document. Then I went home and waited. The first response came not from Ellison, but from Adam. He called my personal cell phone at 6:30 p.m., his voice shaking with either rage or panic. Miranda, what the hell is this? What is what? Adam! This letter, this legal threat. Are you seriously trying to extort the company? I was stirring pasta sauce, the phone wedged between my shoulder and ear. I'm not trying to do anything. I'm enforcing a contract. $40 million. Are you insane? I'm employed by you for another 18 hours. After that, I'm just someone with a legitimate legal claim. Miranda, please. We can work this out. The pension thing. Maybe we can revisit it. Maybe isn't good enough anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone. The pasta was perfectly al dente. Chapter 6. The Panic. They tried to ignore me for a week. I could picture the scene. Lawyers huddled in conference rooms, paralegals scouring contract databases, executives demanding to know how a disgruntled employee had found a $40 million loophole. The second call came from their general counsel, a woman named Patricia Hodges, who sounded like she'd been practicing law since the Coolidge administration. Ms. Clark, I've reviewed your letter, and I'm afraid you're operating under several misconceptions about your legal standing. Such as the fact that Addendum C was superseded by subsequent modifications to your employment agreement. The pension restructuring is entirely within our legal rights. I'd been expecting this. Could you specify which modifications you're referring to? The amendments signed during your annual reviews, the updated benefit structures, the ones that specifically state they don't supersede the original merger agreement? Silence. Ms. Hodges, I've had 15 years to study this contract. I know every comma, every clause, every legal precedent. Your amendments are cosmetic changes that don't touch the core intellectual property licensing agreement. We'll see about that. She hung up. I smiled and made myself a sandwich. The third response was more interesting. A knock on my door at 9 p.m., followed by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Thomas Brennan from Cromwell. Brennan and Associates. Ms. Clark, I'd like to discuss your recent correspondence with my client. Your client? Ellison Cortec. They've retained our firm to handle this matter. I let him in, poured him coffee, and listened to his pitch. It was the usual corporate playbook. They'd fight me in court for years, drain my resources, destroy my reputation. The smart move was to accept a settlement, maybe a restored pension, maybe a small cash payment, and walk away quietly. Mr. Brennan, I said when he finished, how long have you been practicing law? 23 years. And in those 23 years, have you ever seen a contract like the one I'm enforcing? He hesitated. No, I can't say I have. That's because it's bulletproof. I spent 6 months negotiating it with 3 different law firms. Every clause has been tested. Every precedent has been researched. Your client doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Everyone has a legal leg to stand on if they're willing to pay for it. True. But they're not willing to pay $40 million for it. He left his business card and a formal settlement offer, full pension restoration plus $100,000 in good faith compensation. I put the offer in my shredder and went to bed. Chapter 7. The Pressure Campaign. They escalated quickly after that. The next morning, I found 2 more lawyers at my door, then a private investigator parked across the street, then a series of phone calls from journalists wanting to write about corporate whistleblowers. The message was clear: submit or be destroyed. I'd expected this too. Corporate America's response to legal challenges is predictable: lawyer up, investigate, intimidate, and outlast. They had unlimited resources and the patience of institutions. I had rage and a really good contract. The investigation was laughably amateur. They pulled my credit reports, researched my social media presence, and probably talked to my neighbors. What they found was a woman who'd lived quietly, paid her bills on time, and avoided controversy for 15 years. The private investigator quit after a week. The legal pressure was more sophisticated. They filed a motion to dismiss my claim, arguing that the contract was invalid due to changes in corporate structure. They demanded mediation, threatened countersuits, and buried me in paperwork designed to exhaust my resources. I responded by hiring my own lawyer, a shark named David Chen, who specialized in intellectual property disputes. He charged $800 an hour and was worth every penny. "This is the most ironclad contract I've ever seen," he told me during our first meeting. "It's like they handed you a loaded gun and asked you to hold it for them. So we can win? We can't lose. The question is whether you want to settle or go for the full $40 million. I thought about Adam's panicked phone call, about Jessica's fake sympathy, about 15 years of loyalty repaid with betrayal. I want every penny. The real battle began 3 weeks later when Ellison Cortex's stock price started dropping. Someone had leaked news of the lawsuit, and investors were getting nervous. A supply chain management company facing a $40 million intellectual property claim was not a good investment. James Ellison himself called on a Thursday evening. "Miranda, I remember you. From the signing, you were the brilliant young woman who built something remarkable. I was. You destroyed it. We nurtured it. We grew it. We made it into something bigger than you ever could have alone. You made it into a weapon against me. This lawsuit is going to hurt a lot of people. Good people. People who had nothing to do with your pension situation. The same people who had nothing to do with my contributions but benefited from them anyway. What do you want?" $40 million. The exact amount specified in the contract you signed. That's impossible. The company doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. Then you'll have to find it. I hung up and opened a bottle of champagne. The expensive stuff this time. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The media attention was intoxicating. Former employee seeks $40 million from tech giant, read the headlines. David versus Goliath in supply chain software battle. The forgotten clause that could topple a corporation. I gave exactly one interview to a tech journalist who understood the complexity of intellectual property law. I wore my best suit, spoke in measured tones, and calmly explained how a woman's 15 years of loyalty had been repaid with betrayal. The article went viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to the woman who'd outsmarted corporate America. My phone rang constantly, my email inbox overflowed, and reporters camped outside my apartment building. Ellison Cortex's stock price fell another 12 points. Their response was swift and desperate. They offered mediation, arbitration, anything to avoid a public trial. They increased their settlement offer to $5 million, then $10 million, then $20 million. Each offer came with non-disclosure agreements and admissions of no wrongdoing. I rejected them all. "This isn't about money anymore," I told David Chen during one of our strategy sessions. "This is about accountability." "Accountability is expensive," he replied. Are you sure you want to pay the price? I was sure. I'd been building toward this moment for 15 years, even when I didn't know it. Every contract I'd negotiated, every relationship I'd built, every skill I'd developed had led to this confrontation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former Ellison Cortec employee reached out through my lawyer, offering to testify about the company's systematic mistreatment of older workers. Then another, then a dozen more. Suddenly, my lawsuit wasn't just about intellectual property. It was about corporate culture, age discrimination, and the disposability of human capital. The story grew legs, sprouted wings, and flew across the internet like a digital wildfire. Congressional representatives started asking questions. The SEC opened an investigation. The Department of Labor launched an inquiry into Ellison Cortec's employment practices. James Ellison called again. You're destroying the company. You destroyed the company. I'm just presenting the bill. There are 12,000 employees here, good people with families, mortgages, children in college. You're going to put them all on the street. You should have thought of that before you betrayed me. Miranda, please. We can work this out. Full pension restoration, $25 million, a seat on the board of directors. You can have everything you want. I want what I'm owed, $40 million. The company will go bankrupt. Then you should have honored your contracts. Chapter 9. The Endgame. The final meeting was held in the same conference room where I'd signed away my company 15 years earlier. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. James Ellison sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers, accountants, and PR specialists. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 6 months. Adam was there too, hovering in the background like a guilty child. I arrived alone, carrying nothing but a briefcase and the original merger agreement. David Chen had offered to accompany me, but I'd declined. This was personal. Miranda, Ellison began, I want to apologize for how this situation has been handled. The pension restructuring was a business decision, not a personal attack. We never intended. Intent is irrelevant, I interrupted. Actions have consequences. We're prepared to offer you $35 million. It's the maximum we can manage without triggering bankruptcy proceedings. I opened my briefcase and removed the original contract, placing it on the table like a weapon. The contract specifies $40 million, not $35 million, not $39 million, $40 million. Miranda, be reasonable. $5 million is a fortune. You could retire, travel, do whatever you want. I want justice. This isn't justice, this is revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing. The room fell silent. Lawyers whispered among themselves. Accountants tapped calculators. PR specialists typed furiously on their phones. Finally, Ellison spoke. If we pay you $40 million, the company will fold within 6 months. 12,000 people will lose their jobs. Pension funds will be wiped out. Retirement savings will disappear. Is that really what you want? I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. Desperate faces, angry faces, frightened faces. The same faces that had watched me get pushed out without saying a word. You should have thought of that before you decided I was disposable. I stood up, closed my briefcase, and walked toward the door. Miranda, wait. I turned back. $40 million. We'll find a way. You have 72 hours to wire the funds. After that, I execute the technology cessation clause. I left them in the conference room, probably calculating whether they could find $40 million faster than they could find a way to break an unbreakable contract. Chapter 10. The Exit. They found the money. Not easily, not quietly, but they found it. Emergency financing, asset sales, and a humiliating public explanation of how a forgotten contract clause had cost them the GDP of a small country. The wire transfer hit my account on a Friday afternoon. $40 million and 37 cents. The extra change representing 15 years of compound interest as calculated by their own accounting department. I sat in my apartment, staring at the bank statement on my laptop screen, feeling empty, For months, I'd been driven by rage, sustained by the desire for justice, energized by the thrill of the hunt. Now that it was over, I felt nothing but tired. My phone rang. Adam. Miranda, I just wanted to say, don't. I'm sorry. I should have fought for you. I should have stood up when they decided to restructure your pension. I should have been a better friend. You were never my friend, Adam. You were my employee. Then you were my replacement. Now you're just someone who used to know me. The company is going to survive this. We've got new investors, new management, new direction. James Ellison resigned this morning. Good for you. What are you going to do now? I looked around my apartment, at the awards I'd earned, the photos from company events, the mementos of a career that had been stolen from me. Tomorrow, I'd start packing. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. This place belonged to a different Miranda, a woman who'd believed in corporate loyalty and fair play. I'm going to disappear, I told him. Where will you go? Somewhere they've never heard of supply chain management. I hung up and started making a list. $40 million could buy a lot of things: a house in Tuscany, a vineyard in Napa, a small publishing company in Vermont. It could buy freedom, privacy, and the luxury of never having to trust anyone again. But first, I had one more task. I drafted a letter to the 12,000 employees of Ellison Cortec, explaining exactly what had happened and why. I described the pension restructuring, the betrayal, and the contract clause that had saved me. I detailed the company's systematic mistreatment of older workers and their assumption that loyalty was a one-way street. I posted the letter on Medium, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within days, it had become a manifesto for corporate accountability. The message was simple. They can fire you, but they can't erase you. They can steal your pension, but they can't steal your legacy. And if you're smart enough, patient enough, and angry enough, you can make them pay for every betrayal. I deleted my social media accounts, changed my phone number, and put my apartment on the market. The woman who'd spent 15 years building someone else's dream was gone. In her place was someone with $40 million and nothing left to lose. The last thing I did was drive to Ellison Cortec's headquarters one final time. I parked across the street and watched people hurrying in and out of the building, carrying the same briefcases, wearing the same worried expressions, living the same corporate lives I'd left behind. None of them looked up. None of them noticed the woman in the Toyota Camry who just cost their company $40 million. I was invisible again, just like I'd been for 15 years. The difference was, now I chose to be invisible. I started the car and drove away, leaving behind the life I'd built and the company I'd served. In my rearview mirror, the Ellison Cortec building grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. They'd thought they could discard me like an outdated piece of software. Instead, they'd learned that some code never stops running, some contracts never expire, and some women never forget. The highway stretched ahead, empty and full of possibilities. I had $40 million, a clean slate, and the rest of my life to figure out what came next. Behind me, Ellison Cortec was learning to function without the technology I'd built, the expertise I'd provided, and the loyalty I'd given. It would be expensive, difficult, and probably impossible. But that was their problem now. I had wine to drink, books to read, and a future to build. This time, I'd be the only shareholder. The radio was playing an old song, something about taking the money and running. I turned up the volume and pressed harder on the accelerator. $40 million bought a lot of things, but the most valuable thing it bought was the last laugh. And I was laughing all the way to the bank.